Welcome to Fire Safe Marin's webinar series. My name is Rich Shortall, the Fire Safe Marin Executive Coordinators. Fire Safe Marin webinar series is created by the members of our educational committee. It includes representatives from fire agencies, environmental groups, UC Marin Master Gardeners, and various subject matter experts. The project is funded and supported by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. It's designed to help you understand and prepare for the threat of wildfire here in Marin. If we all do our part, we can certainly minimize risks and save lives and property. We would like to encourage all you to participate tonight by providing questions in writing through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Questions that can't be addressed during tonight's conversation will be answered and posted on the Fire Safe Marin website. We do ask that you keep your questions related to our topic. Tonight's presentation will be recorded and it's available on the Fire Safe Marin YouTube channel, which includes many additional wildfire educational videos. We're very excited tonight to have as presenters, number one, Novato Fire Chief William Tyler, who will discuss the elements of a fire adapted community. And the next one will be Battalion Chief Todd Lando with the Central Marin Fire Department. He's going to be covering some of the strategies you can take at the last minute to protect your home from wildfire. This would be a situation where you perhaps have 12, 24, even 48 hours where you know a wildfire may be coming. There are still last minute things you can do to better protect your home. And finally, we'll have Steve Quarles, Chief Scientist, now retired from IBHS, who's going to talk about what we call active strategies for protecting our homes. Following the webinar, we have an additional 15 minutes of question and answer. So let me start by introducing Chief Tyler.
Thank you very much, Rich. I appreciate that introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you now. I think that we need to start by trying to answer what is a fire adaptive community. And there's a couple of definitions because every community is different, and the different activities that go into a fire adaptive community are going to vary depending on the community itself. The National Wildfire Coordinating Group defines a fire adaptive community as a human community consisting of informed and prepared citizens collaboratively planning and taking action to safely coexist with wildfire. So you see across the top, that means whether you're a civic leader, a developer, a business owner, a first responder, a land manager, or a homeowner, there are all roles to play. Everyone has a responsibility in a fire adaptive community. Civic leaders might have to focus on where various developments are going to be made. They are going to possibly pass rules and ordinances around defensible space around structures or hardening of homes that affect building and safety codes. Developers and business owners also need to use non-combustible building materials, and they need to make sure that their developments have adequate defensible space and that they don't build in high fire risk areas. First responders need to work on educating the public on the activities that they can do to help protect themselves. A program such as Ready, Set, Go, where homeowners get ready, they get a plan together, and when they're asked to evacuate, they actually go. In addition, we have to create emergency plans for our first responders and educate them on interacting with the public as well. Land managers need to treat hazardous fuels and reduce their risk from wildfire. They have to identify and assess the risks that they have on their own lands that they have to manage, and then collaboratively work to reduce those risks. And then homeowners have a part to play. They, as a neighborhood, can become a firewise community. They certainly need to create and maintain their 100 feet of defensible space, and then maintain their roofs and gutters, for example. Another definition that's widely used comes from the U.S. Forest Service, and it is a knowledgeable and engaged community in which awareness and actions of residents regarding infrastructure, building, landscaping, and the surrounding ecosystem lessen the need for extensive protection actions and enables the community to safely accept fire as a part of the surrounding landscape. So when you see comparatively side by side, many people have the mindset that they need to have a war on fire. And a shift in thinking from a fire adaptive community standpoint might be that we need to work with the flow, the natural process that fire actually is. People might start with the mindset that wildfire is destructive, but they also need to understand that wildfire is a necessary natural process. People think that they need to control wildfire on their landscapes, but they also need to learn to live with fire on these fire adaptive landscapes. A lot of people think that we just simply need to prevent and suppress the fires. Another mindset is to create fire-resistant human and natural communities together. Some people feel that the problem of wildfires is that they are escaping control. But there also is equally the problem that by suppressing all of these fires in the natural wildfire have helped create a problem of buildup of fuels, which creates much larger and unnatural fires. Lastly, people may think that the solution to applying existing procedures and technology just will bring a more strong control of fire, whereas a fire adaptive community might understand finally that the solution is to develop a more holistic approach to fire management, where local communities adjacent to property owners and government work together to co-manage the fire risk. It's important to understand that in fire adaptive communities, the public understands certain components. They understand that there's a role that fire will play on the surrounding landscape. They understand that fire authorities cannot save all homes. They may not be able to. And lastly, that the community mitigation actions will reduce the unwanted impacts of wildfire. In a fire adaptive community, the public also is going to take action. They're going to support and enhance local fire protection capacity, what the firefighters can do, and then what they can do through Ready, Set, Go. They can prepare structures for wildfire via either being firewise or living with fire or similar principles. They need to take action to build fire-resistant materials and use low-risk landscapes. They also need to increase and maintain risk reduction efforts over time. This is the holistic approach that the community needs to take under a fire adaptive community model. The community takes a variety of integrative actions specific to their community. So if you look at the diagram and take a look at community engagement, there's a number of activities that can be taken. Certainly, we need to be inclusive and engage diverse communities. There is every year wildfire preparation week that happens in May with campaigns and activities that people can take. There are neighborhood ambassadors. Often neighbors will come to us with this being a very important first step, and they want to create community meetings and events, and fire agencies support them on that. There's also a public health component to this. Everyone remembers the terrible smoke conditions and poor health that was created by the fires over this last summer. And that also causes a lot of stress, social and mental health effects as well. There's a big wildfire recovery component in those communities that have suffered fires. There are long-term recovering plans that need to be considered. Post-fire flooding and erosion. Currently, as we speak, there are strike teams of engines headed down to Santa Cruz to deal with the concern of a lot of rain that we're going to get in these burn scars. Our own Marin Search and Urban Rescue are down in Santa Cruz tonight, already prepared for this potential inevitability. But there's also business resiliency that needs to come into play. There's safety and evacuation components that need to be learned at all levels. The Ready, Set, Go, an understanding of what safety zones are, or areas if you can't completely get out in an evacuation, where can you go to reasonably be expected to be able to ride out the fire? These temporary areas of refuge or areas of last resort need to be known and understood. There's improvements that need to happen to these evacuation routes for both the ingress and egress, ingress of emergency vehicles and the escape of the public. And then an understanding of go kits and evacuation plans all need to be understood. There's what the resident and what the community can do by becoming a firewise neighborhood, by maintaining their defensible space, by practicing home and installing home hardening features, which you'll learn more tonight. Then there's the wildfire response. What are the capabilities of the local fire department? And then if there's a large fire, like we had at the Woodward fire out in West Marin and Inverness, you're going to the community's going to have to deal and interface with incident management teams that come in to help manage those fires. There are plans and regulations. There's a brand new community wildfire protection plan update that's just been done. It's available for you to look at and learn on Fire Safe Marin's website. There are wildland urban interface codes and ordinances that are in play in many town communities that help reduce and mitigate the risk to structure loss over time. There's also fuel breaks that can be made, prescribed fire, introducing fire back to the landscape, and thinning projects. So as you can see, there are many different steps that a community can take, and not every community is going to take the same step. You know, fire adaptive communities are for every community and they're unique. There are certain steps and strategies that they can take to improve their own resilience, and they will vary from place to place. All stakeholders have share the wildfire risk. They have to become a part of fire adaptive communities. They have to help with the strategy and the stress. Everyone shares a responsibility. Is a fire adaptive community just a new name for Firewise? No, it's not. Firewise is a program. Fire adaptive communities is a process, again, a holistic approach. And then how will we know when the community is finally fire adaptive? There is no ending defined point for communities striving to live more safely with wildfire because the work is never finished. At the heart of the process is this local collaboration and planning, coordination and action. It takes agencies, citizens, and all players have to get together and exchange ideas and information about these efforts and lay out strategies for moving forward together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chief. Really appreciate it. That was not only very important, but also very interesting presentation. I'm going to have a couple questions to ask you. Before I get to that, I do want to remind the audience to take advantage of the Q&A function. We have the Chief here, and here's your opportunity to ask some follow-up questions because fire adaptive communities are somewhat of a new concept. We used to, in the past, talk about living with fire. I think fire adaptation is really a much better approach and a better description of where we all want to go with this. One of the things that we often hear talked about that I wanted to ask the Chief is there's a concept called start where you stand when it comes to preparedness. Can you relate that to fire adaptive communities?
Yes, thank you. You know, starting where you stand means that you have personal responsibility to learn about how to harden your home and create defensible space. Right now, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority has identified wildfire mitigation specialists and people that can go around and help evaluate your property. So starting where you stand means to invite those evaluations to occur. Stand on your own property, meet with the firefighters that can make assessments of the property and share with you evaluations to come up with the prescription that you can take over time to reduce the risk to your own property. You're starting from the house out. More than 50% of the property in Marin County is privately owned. You have the power and you just need the knowledge and you need some incentives and some help to get the work done. So start with where you stand, the house out, from your roof all the way down through your construction materials, harden the home, create defensible space. You'll have a plan that you can implement.
Well, thank you, Chief. Another question that comes to us at Fire Safe Marin all the time is, how can you eliminate all wildfire risk? And yet I hear you talk that this is really a project that's never finished. Is it possible to completely eliminate the risk of wildfire?
You know, there's always different levels of risk. What you can do is reduce your hazards. Risk is really the probability about whether something would happen, but the hazards are something that you can take concrete steps to change. And you can do that over time in small incremental steps. We don't know if a fire is going to occur, you know, this summer in Marin. We know we will have fires, and we're trying to do everything we can to prevent a catastrophic one. But this work really never ends. We can always reduce the hazards, which then in turn reduce the risk of a catastrophic wildfire.
Great. Another question we get all the time at Fire Safe Marin is, you mentioned the fact that we have the wildfire mitigation specialists that are going out there to help homeowners to evaluate what the hazards are in their properties and how to address those. The question I get all the time is, how do I phone up and get an appointment for somebody to come by and do that for me? Is that practical? Is that where we're going?
Yes, you should, if you're curious and would like to do that, you can contact your local fire department and they will direct you to someone that can come out and help you with an evaluation. So this is being done all across the county in different ways, but we can get someone to your door to help you with an evaluation so you can learn what you can do to take those steps to reduce your risks.
Another question, it's sort of the ongoing question, always has to do with evacuation. We've given several webinars about evacuations, and I will tell the audience there's a lot of content on our website about evacuations. The question that comes up here is, we live on a dead end street. What can the fire department do to help us to evacuate?
So the fire department, there's a number of things early on with the assessments. We constantly try to improve firefighter access, turnaround, and that also helps with egress. But what the fire department specifically is going to be doing is going up and down these areas before a fire occurs, familiarizing themselves with the areas, talking to the homeowners about what they can do. You can also take concrete steps to try and reduce the impacts of parking and make sure that you keep lanes open for ingress and egress of fire engines. But the way we're going to notify you in case of an emergency is going to be, it could be sirens. It could be the high-low sirens that are coming through to let you know it's time to evacuate. It certainly will be through the other tools that we have for notifications through the county, through direct phone calls. But the way that you find out about a fire may be the sirens coming down the street.
Great. We have to move on with the webinar. I think we have time for one more question, and I think this is another good one. There are people who are reluctant to contact the fire department or other authorities to come out and do an evaluation because they're worried about getting a citation. How does that fit into this picture?
Our efforts are really focused on education and providing incentives for people to do the right thing. There may be a time down the road where all of the work, some people will not comply after time. And as fire agencies, we'll work to bring those folks into compliance. But right now, it is an educational component. It is writing a prescription. We want to help you help yourself.
Great, thanks, Chief. Well, Chief, thank you very much for a great presentation. The Chief will be back with us later. And thank you to the audience for the questions you bring forward. That's really helpful. We'll try to get to more of some of them later on, and then perhaps we can answer some offline as the presentation goes forward. But I would like to take the opportunity now to bring on Todd Lando, Battalion Chief with Central Marin Fire Department, who's going to talk to us about some of the last minute strategies to protect your home in case of a wildfire. Todd?
Thanks, Rich. Before I start, I want to take a minute to thank Fire Safe Marin, Rich, your staff, Kathleen, John, Dominic, and everybody else, Jen Gauna, everybody else who's working to put these programs together. I can't tell you how proud I am to look at this, be a part of this organization, and see that there are several hundred people logged in right now on Zoom and Facebook watching this as we prepare for flash flood warnings in January. It really says something about what this organization can offer. So thank you. Tonight, I'm going to take about 15 minutes to talk about some real practical steps, last minute steps that you can take as a homeowner to protect your home when a wildfire is burning nearby or a fire is approaching your home. I'll talk a little bit about how you make that decision and what practical things you can do when you only have a few seconds to prepare. This doesn't negate all of the preparations that we've talked about through home hardening and defensible space. Everything we talk about tonight really depends on you also doing that hard work, but there are things that you can change as you're on your way out your door, even to evacuate, that can make a big difference on whether you come home to your house still standing during a fire. Everything I'm going to talk about tonight is based on Fire Safe Marin's Wildfire Evacuation Checklist. This is a printed checklist or available in a PDF file at Fire Safe Marin's website. We've got the address here. We'll share it with you, and it's easy to find. We've distributed almost 300,000 copies of this over the last 5 years in Marin. You've probably received one of these at your doorstep from one of those wildfire hazard evaluators or inspectors from MWPA or your local fire department. You received these in the mail if you live in the Wildland Urban Interface areas in our Living with Fire magazine, mailed just last year. So they're available, they're in print. You can ask for one from Fire Safe Marin or your local fire department. On this wildfire evacuation checklist, there are 3 columns. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is what's the contents of the center column, the second column. These are things that you can do if time allows. I'm going to cover each one of these check boxes. I'm going to give them about 30 seconds because these are quick things. They're down and dirty tips that, like I said, can make a difference for you when a fire is approaching. How do you know if you have enough time, if time allows? We're talking about things that you can do if you have 2 or more hours before a fire arrives. You need to give yourself some cushion. These aren't things that you're going to be doing if embers are falling in your neighborhood. So these are things that you might do when there's a red flag warning. Maybe there isn't a fire yet, but the conditions are just right for a fire. You can do each one of these steps. It's not going to hurt you to take a walk around your property and do these things. You certainly do these things if there's a fire, the typical fires that we see in Marin burning nearby. Not every fire is going to turn into a catastrophe, but you still ought to take these steps anytime there's a fire burning in your community, a wildfire. These are things that you would do if you receive an evacuation warning. I'm not going to go through that in detail. We've already covered that in several other presentations, lots of information online. But an evacuation warning and an evacuation order are 2 different things. If you receive a warning saying that you've got some time to prepare, that's the time to do these things. You're not going to do these things if there are embers falling in your neighborhood, those little bits of burning material or big chunks of ash. You don't do that then. That's a signal that it's time for you to leave. And you don't do this if you've been given an evacuation order, which means that you must leave immediately. No time to prepare your house. You only prepare yourself. So again, evacuation order, if embers are falling, if the sky turns black, or if conditions change and you just don't know if you're safe or not, skip these steps. But if you've got time, let's go through the checklist. I'm going to start with things that you can do inside your house, and that's where I want you to start. You're preparing that inside space just in case you have to take shelter inside the house if you weren't able to evacuate for some reason. We want you to start by shutting all of the windows and doors around your house. We want to make sure that your doors and windows are unlocked, front door, back door, every entrance should be unlocked. Keep the doors closed and unlocked, same with windows. You'll ask maybe why do we want to keep these shut? Why do we want to keep them unlocked? We want to stop smoke and embers from entering the home. Embers especially, those little bits of burning material, if they come in through an open door, can ignite things inside your home and burn your house down. It happens. We want you to create compartments by closing all of the bedroom doors and hallway doors inside your house. So if somehow the fire gets into the house, you've broken it up into spaces, buys you additional time if you have to shelter in the house, and it might buy the fire department some extra time to put that fire out if you're lucky enough to get a fire engine to your door quickly. Why unlocked? We want you to be able to escape from any door inside your house, and we want to provide a place for firefighters to be able to enter your structure, to check to see if you and your pets, your family are okay, to check for fire inside the house, and we want them to be able to do that without breaking that door down. If they have to break the door down during a fire, they may not be able to shut it again, and it may make your house more vulnerable. But sometimes we've got to check inside the house to see if people are there. This photograph down below, this is a photograph from the Thomas fire in Southern California just 2.5 years ago. This is a house. You can see the fire's off in the background on the left here. And if you look close at this photo, you'll see that even though the fire's burned by, you can't even see flames in the background. The house is burning. And if you look really close, you'll see why. This was a fire hardened structure. They even had sprinklers on their roof and around the edge of the house. The homeowner made one small mistake. They left their home to evacuate, and they left one window cracked open, and ember entered that space and caused hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. Just so happens that fire engines from Marin County showed up, found this, took the photograph, and then put the fire out and saved the rest of the house. Inside the house, we want you to turn every light on, inside and out. Your exterior lights are especially important. We want you to do this day or night. The reason being, even during the middle of the day when a wildfire is approaching, it's going to get dark. Some of these photos, like the one you're looking at right here, this is not in the middle of the night. This is in the middle of the day. Those lights can help firefighters find your house. They can help you find your way to escape, to evacuate, and to make it easier for the firefighters to work if they arrive to protect your home during the fire. Really important step. We want you to turn your air conditioning off, right? Heat and air conditioning. We never used to say heat, but now we see fires in the middle of winter in California. So turn all of your fans and anything that circulates air through your house off. That'll help protect you, prevent the fire from spreading via fans inside your house. We want you to move outdoors next and think about anything that's combustible, anything that can burn outside. We want you to specifically look at a few items. Patio furniture cushions. The cushions especially are vulnerable. They're usually made from soft synthetic materials. Embers will land on them during a fire. Those synthetics can ignite and can potentially burn your house down. Look for flammable furniture. Wicker furniture especially is made from a fine flammable grass even that could potentially ignite if embers land on it. Heavy metal furniture is best. Wood furniture, if it's a heavy teak table, probably not as vulnerable, but you want to think about any outdoor furniture that could burn. We want you to take these things and move them away from your house, 30 feet or more from your house. And I always say, and it's tough to get the reaction here on Zoom, but I always say and get a chuckle, well, don't move these things closer to your neighbor's house. If you've got a property that's big enough where you can move them 30 feet from anybody's home, go ahead and do that. If you don't have a safe place in your yard, many yards aren't that big, you can move these items inside your house. Put them right in the middle of the living room, your outdoor furniture, all this stuff, stack it up inside the house where it won't be exposed to embers. This would include outdoor toys, things that you might have in the yard that belong to your kids. Natural fiber doormats. We don't want to see these at all during the summertime. They tend to collect embers and ignite right at your wooden front door. Your trash and recycling cans are made from plastic. Oftentimes they're full of cardboard and other recyclables. Things like a firewood pile, which you're not supposed to store within 30 feet of a home. But if you do, if you've got firewood on your front porch or your back deck, you've got to move that either indoors or 30 feet or more away from any building. We don't want you to be this guy who unfortunately is moving things when it's too late, right? At this point, he's got to evacuate. Moving the kayak's not going to help things at this point. We're past that. So move these things early when time allows. Outside, we want you to shut off your gas meter. This is something that you should learn to do both for earthquake preparedness and wildfire preparedness. If you shut off the gas supply, it can help protect your house somewhat during a fire. If you've got small propane tanks or a large propane tank, if you live in West Marin, for example, we want you to shut that tank off, close the valves. Small propane tanks can either be moved 30 feet or more from any structure where there's nothing combustible around them, or you can actually move them indoors to protect them if needed. We want you to connect every garden hose you've got. Garden hoses connected outside should be turned on as long as you've got one of these types of nozzles on. Turn the water on, go ahead and leave them in your yard where firefighters might find them and use them to put out spot fires while they're protecting your home. This squeeze grip nozzle, believe it or not, is key. I think as a firefighter, many of the firefighters I know would say they've saved more homes with a garden hose than they have with fire hoses during wildfires. A lot of truth to that. Setting these garden hoses out where the fire department can find them can be a lifesaver for your property. We want you to consider filling water buckets. These are things, again, you do if you have time. Filling buckets and placing them outside the house can provide a last-minute source of water if the municipal water system fails. If the fire engines aren't able to refill, the firefighters will look for any source of water to help put out these small spot fires. This photograph was taken in West Marin just last summer during the Woodward fire. This is a homeowner who was given this wildfire preparedness checklist by inspectors during the Woodward fire. This was inside an evacuation warning zone. The homeowner had time to prepare. They cleaned their roof, they cleaned the base of the walls around the house, and they placed buckets of water and garden hoses out at every corner. I appreciate them. If they happen to be watching tonight, kudos for doing the right thing. We want you to clean your rain gutters safely if you've got time on a ladder. Clean those rain gutters. You ought to be keeping these clean at all times during the summer, but it's not going to hurt you to do a last-minute check if a wildfire is burning nearby. Get your gutters clean. Absolutely no leaf litter on your roof or inside your gutters. This is too little too late. This is somebody that didn't clean their rain gutters. You don't want to be this person. There are embers falling. Their gutters have already ignited. This is a wood roof. This home did not survive. I hope that these residents survive. This was during the Oakland Hills fire in 1991. Don't wait. Do it early. We want you to back your car into your driveway. Take the time to turn your car around, back it in. If you don't have a driveway, make sure that it's facing out, facing downhill or towards your evacuation route if it's parked on a street. Keep your doors unlocked to your car. Load your car up with those valuables and the other things that are talked about on that evacuation checklist. Be prepared to leave. Keep your keys either in the ignition if you feel comfortable and think it's secure, or keep them someplace in your pocket, on your person, where you're not going to have to run to look for them when conditions change and it's time to go. We want you to prop open driveway fences, side gates to your house. Why do we want you to do that? This is actually really important. We find that fences are very vulnerable to igniting during wildfires. Fences are almost always attached to the house with a gate. Just by opening that gate, you can create a separation, something of a fuel break, a fire break between the fence and your home. If the fence catches fire, it can't spread to your home if that gate is propped open. And this does something else. It lets firefighters look down the side of your property. When a fire engine is patrolling your neighborhood during a fire, they can look down the side of your house now. They can see into your backyard and potentially see if there are spot fires or other hazards occurring in the backyard. And it lets the firefighters know that that gate's unlocked. During a critical situation, if they fear that the gate is unlocked, they may not take the time to even go into your backyard to check to see if things are okay. Make your home as enticing as possible to the firefighters. We want you to place ladders. Most people have got a ladder that can reach their roof. We want you to take your ladders and place them where they're visible to those firefighters again, strategically. Near the corners of the house is best, but any place that they can potentially access your roof makes it more likely that the firefighters are going to climb up on your roof to pick up that tiny spot fire that they may see. Moving the heavy fire ladders on the fire engine can be time consuming. If they see a time saver, your house is more likely to still be standing when you come home. We want you to think about covering your vents. If you've got time, cover the vents that go into the crawl space, and if you have the means and a tall enough ladder, even into the attic space of your house. We recommend having pre-cut plywood or metal covers that you make well in advance of a fire and that you screw on to the siding of your house to cover these vents. If you don't have those pre-cut covers, if you haven't made them yet, if it's still on your to-do list, you can actually use even heavy duct tape, or in this case, this was a real house that we helped prepare in Inverness during the Woodward fire. And this is a heavy aluminized duct tape made for sealing vents. Great choice. It will absolutely prevent embers from entering through those vents. When you're outside your property and you've taken the time to go through all of these steps and you have not yet received an evacuation order, we'd like you to take some time and get to know your surroundings, patrol your property, look for hazards, pay attention to the sky, make sure that you're in contact with the outside world. So you've got a cell phone that's working, that you have reception so that you can receive alerts by Nixle or Alert Marin. If you don't have either of those, make sure you've got a NOAA weather radio that gives you reception and can hear evacuation orders for large areas. Make sure you're in contact with the outside world and make sure you're patrolling your property. If conditions change or you're given that evacuation order or you see embers start to fall from the sky, it's time to get in that car that's already backed in your driveway and drive away. Take these steps, take the time when time allows, and there's a good chance that you'll come home to a house that's still standing.
Great. Well, thank you, Todd. That was a great presentation. So many ideas that I think many of us would not have really thought of. I think this is an interesting segue. We started with Chief Tyler talking about fire adaptive communities, and a lot of that work is well before the wildfires ever get here. And then this is a good example where time is really a factor in this. I think you did a good job of making that, but just once again, re-emphasizing that this isn't something that you do when the embers are falling on top of you. and you've gotten the evacuation order and you need to get out the door. You want to just kind of clarify one more time to everybody when they should be thinking about these steps?
Yeah, these are things to do, again, if there's a small fire burning in your neighborhood, during a red flag warning, or if you've specifically received an evacuation warning message. Those warning messages will go out when we think you start to need to prepare for a potential evacuation at least 2 hours or more into the future. So if you've got time, if the fire department has alerted you through that warning message that you've got some time to prepare, 2 hours or more, go ahead and take these steps. You should be able to do all of these things in 30 minutes. And it never hurts to leave early. If you're in doubt, go ahead and leave. Don't take these steps if it's going to risk your safety. Your home is insured. Your life may be insured, but we don't want you to be injured or to test your policy. Go ahead and pack your go bag into your vehicle and head downhill. Get to the valley floor where you're safe.
Great, thanks. I'm not seeing, well, actually just one question. We're not really getting a lot of questions in the audience right now, but Todd will be back for us at the end. Try to think about some of the things he brought up, and you can bring these up during the roundtable. And I do want to thank you very much, Todd, for making the time for this. I want to get on now to bring on Steve Quarles. And Steve is going to talk about, in some ways, it's the more exotic or active strategies for protecting your home. And all of a sudden, in the last 6 months or so, Fire Safe Marin has gotten a lot of questions from people about this. So apparently it's a topic that's on everybody's mind. I think there's a lot of work being done by vendors around this. So I think it's important that we get the straight facts about how some of the stuff like sprinklers and gels and paints and so forth actually work. So with that, I want to introduce Steve and take it away.
Thanks. Jen, if you can put up the slides. Great. So I just would like to thanks, Rich, and thank you all for joining tonight. I would just like to sort of set the stage by defining some of these things, the way that I think about mitigation strategies, and that is to separate them into what I call passive and active strategies. So passive strategies, these are things that you do long before the wildfire is threatening. You do them and then you just maintain them. You sit back and maintain them. Some of these things can be installing finer mesh screens or flame and ember resistant vents on your attic or crawl space, installing a gutter cover. You do them and you're done. What Todd had just talked about was what I would call active strategies. You do this prior to evacuating, and these are intended to have short-term benefits. So passive strategies, long-term benefit, active strategies, short-term benefit. You do before you evacuate and you undo when you return. So covering your vent, you do it before you evacuate, and then you undo that by taking tape off, for example, when you return. So the intent really is short term. I'm going to focus this evening on a few of the more involved strategies, gels, exterior sprinkler systems, and then these aluminized laminate wraps. We'll talk about each one in turn. So next slide, Jen. Thanks. So why would you consider some of these more involved strategies? There's two pictures on this slide. The upper left shows a pretty good defensible space. And then you can imagine maybe there's a Class A fire rated roof covering. You have dual pane tempered glass windows. You have many things that are sort of home hardening features and a good defensible space. So you have a good coupled design that can resist wildland fire. So the lower right-hand picture, not so good defensible space, a lot of debris on the roof. So you could choose to use one of these more elaborate strategies to compensate for poor defensible space or home hardening actions you haven't been able to get around to. You could use them because it just gives you a greater comfort level. So what I want to discuss today is, or this evening, is things we know and things we don't really know about how these other strategies can perform. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start out by talking about exterior sprinkler systems. And this slide just shows you the various places on your property where these sprinklers could be installed. They can be installed on your roof. They can be installed in the under eave area pointing down, or they can be installed on the property looking out. So what location is one thing, one decision that you might have to consider. If you, there are a number, as Rich alluded to, there are a number of commercial vendors out there, and they have decided some of these things we're going to be talking about regarding exterior sprinklers. They've decided these things for you. So if you go to the next slide, Jen. A couple of years ago, a few years ago, before I left IBHS, some colleagues and myself developed a number of these wildfire research fact sheets in conjunction with NFPA, and one of them was on exterior sprinklers. So these are readily available online. You can go and read some of the issues, but I think two things that are pretty clear about use of exterior sprinkler systems is that, one, you want to have a standalone water supply. You don't want to rely on municipal water. You can utilize it. It wouldn't be available necessarily for first responders and the like. And you want to anticipate your power going out. And so you would want a backup power supply or a way to deliver the water that doesn't rely on electricity, for example, so that you can have various generators that would be electricity, but there are some pressure delivery systems. You can sort of rely on that, for example. There are a number of factors that really dictate how well one of these systems might work. As I indicated, a lot of the a lot of the commercial providers have decided many of these things for you if you choose to go that route, but you can buy off-the-shelf sprinklers that are meant to be on your roof or on your property, and you'll have to decide some of these things yourself. What's the pressure going to be? How will the system be activated? Will the system have the ability to cycle, so you can have water on, water off cycles? This will help extend the amount of water that it'll extend the life of the system, because you'll preserve water or conserve water. Can you activate it remotely? Can it be activated by a sensor, like an infrared sensor that can detect heat? Some commercial systems incorporate additives to the water that make the system more efficient in terms of use of water and their ability to extinguish fire. These are things that you'll need to talk about. There definitely have been, well, let's go to the next slide, Jen. So this is an example of a home project, a DIY project, where the sprinklers were installed on top of the roof. And you'll notice in the lower right-hand picture that the area right next to the home did not have any water at all. So this could be a problem, because embers could bypass, no, some embers could bypass that sprinkler and land next to the home and ignite the home that way. So I think some of the things that we don't know so well is, what does wind do to sprinklers on the property during a high wind wildfire event? So it's possible that the wind would make the water from the sprinkler system land next to the house. So I think you just need to be cognizant of the fact that the water on a calm, sunny day, when you turn it on to check it out, it may not do exactly that during a windy wildfire event day. And we know that wind has the greatest impact on coverage. So wind can blow the water in various directions, not necessarily where you want it to go. There has been just a little bit of third-party or independent research on the effectiveness of these sprinkler systems. One that I'm thinking of was done a few years ago by a Canadian government research entity, FP Innovations, and they did clearly demonstrate that a sprinkler system on the property pointed toward in this case, their test building, did survive a wildland fire in a forested area. So, I think that these things can help. I think there are just a number of factors that you need to consider when you're deciding whether or not to use this particular kind of a system. So next slide, Jim. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about gels. Gels, I think we need to understand the difference between a gel and a foam. A gel is a super absorbent polymer, so it has a lot of water in it. You spray this on the side of your home. You can spray it on vegetation also. And it's this abundance of water that has to be evaporated by the heat of the fire that protects your home or your vegetation, your plants. And once that water is evaporated, then the protection is gone, but it's the water part that is in this polymer that makes this work. So foams on the other hand, change the water to make to affect what's called the surface tension of the water, and it makes the water more efficient in extinguishing fire. So you need less water, so to speak, when it's a foam base, but it doesn't stick well to horizontal, to vertical surfaces. And so you can't really expect it to hang around for a long time and protect any kind and expect any kind of long-term performance. So foams typically are used for active fires. Gels are used to protect for a fire yet to come. So gels can be applied by the resident or by a first responder. If we'll talk about some of the concerns if a resident applies, but I think the important thing is regardless of who applies, the minute you apply it, it starts to dry out, it starts to dehydrate. And so the effective time that water is going to be present is going to depend on temperature and wind kind of conditions, but it's not going to be forever. So next slide, Jen, thanks. So there has been a recent research project that evaluated how long gels would last. This was a project that I was involved with when I was with IBHS, and it just published last year. And I think it was pretty clear that the effective time for a gel product once applied was about 3 hours. So not a long time. And this sort of made us think that when a homeowner is doing this, really, your time is better spent elsewhere than doing this because the duration of effectiveness isn't so long. If it's a first responder, whether that be like your firefighter on the fire or one of these third-party firefighters that might be hired by your insurance industry to look at one home or several homes in an area, and they can come back to the home and rehydrate the gel, then it's a different issue and it's a different scenario, different story. But for a homeowner, it's really hard to argue that it's an effective use of time. And Jan, if you go to the next slide. Here's just an example from a demonstration I did a couple of years, many years ago now, but I think the point that I took home from this is that the gel needs to be applied everywhere if you're going to do this. And if you're a resident, you're probably not going to be very experienced at applying a gel. The gel was applied to this wall by a very experienced applicator. And let's just leave it at that. But you'll notice that one little spot under the drip edge was missed. And then if you go to the next slide, Jen, after the application of the gel, we waited a few hours and then burned a wood crib at the base of both walls. And the wall in the left-hand picture, the wall on the right had no gel. The wall on the left had the gel. they were the same material. And on the right-hand picture, you'll notice that the fire burned through the siding into the stud cavity behind the wall. And so, that gel wasn't effective because of that little bit that was missed. And it seems to me something that a homeowner applying a gel for the first time could easily do. And it just so happens that the report that we talked about from FP Innovations made this particular comment that you can see in the right-hand picture: all areas of structure at risk to direct flame or radiant heat must be thoroughly treated. And we can see here what happens when it's not thoroughly treated. So you have the time factor, not so much time, 3 hours or so, and then you have the need to get everywhere and the likelihood of missing somewhere. And gels don't stick so well to glass, so you really can't expect it to protect glass in a window for as long as maybe siding. So that's some of the pros. If it's a first responder, it's one story. If it's a homeowner, it's a different story in my mind. And so those are the pros and cons of gels. Next slide, Jen. We're going to finish up just talking a little bit about these aluminized laminate wraps. And here we have two pictures here. These are both, federal government property. And you'll notice the picture on the left, the wrap covers the entire structure except for the chimney that you can see there. The right-hand picture is the Sperry Chalet, Glacier National Park, from a few years ago. And you'll notice that they just wrapped windows and the front part of the building that wasn't a stone. But they did not put the wrap over top of the roof and in the under-eave area. And you'll notice that there's this chalet is on fire. It burned. The combustible parts burned to the ground. So there was a neglect of the embers and the vulnerabilities in that under-eave area. Again, wraps can work, but you need to consider how much time and how many people you're going to have to put this on, and where are you going to put it. If you're going to put it all over the place, it's going to take much longer time. And whether you have that kind of person power hanging around, as you're evacuating, it's hard to know. So if you go to the next slide, Jen, and this is just, if you go this route, you really still need to make sure you have pretty good defensible space. I mean, to have the kind of fire that you see in this picture, maybe it's an unreasonable fire for many homes, but I think the point here is if there's a scenario where you can have direct flame contact to the wrap, you can expect it to delaminate, and you can then expect it not to work at all. It'll sort of fall off. And this was from a study sponsored by the federal government to try to get a handle on how various coatings work. And this one, the wrap was just one of the coatings, and this was a standard fire, so to speak, for each of the coatings that they evaluated. So delamination is a possibility. If you go this route, you want to make sure you have some semblance of defensible space to avoid direct flame contact to the wrap itself. So next slide, Jen. So let's just sort of summarize. We've tried to present some of the pros and cons of strategies. We talked about gels, we talked about exterior sprinklers, and then these wraps. Passive strategies, those that you do and maintain, I think there's some proven benefits to them. Active strategies, you'll notice that there are just some potential gotchas when you use them, and things you need to consider when you implement them. As I said, exterior sprinklers, a lot of vendors out there, they've made a lot of decisions for you, but there's very little third-party evaluation of systems as a whole. I'm sure they've thought about a lot of these gotchas and have worked out bugs. Some research has shown that they definitely can be effective. Gels, it's not really recommended for homeowners. It's a different story if you're a first responder or you have a way, a means to rehydrate the gel over time as it dries out. And then we've also discussed some of the issues with regard to the wraps. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Rich, and we can answer questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate that. Very interesting to say the least. One sort of generic question is, would you consider any of these strategies, if they are effective, to be a substitute for creating defensible space and home hardening and the type of recommendations we've been going over for the last 6 months?
I would not.
That's what I straightforward. So it's definitely, these are not magic wand answers to make our home safer. I think that's important to know. One of the questions that came from the audience is along the lines of gels and foams. Is there any chemical that could be applied in the form of a treatment to vegetation seasonally? Apparently there's companies that say they can come in and do this and eliminate risk of fire for you.
So there is a product that you probably are asking about. It is the same kind of chemical that is dropped, that you see being dropped out of airplanes, that is a red color. That you can have a clear version of this. It is a fertilizer, and so it is considered to be a long-term fire retardant because it doesn't rely on water. So it gets applied in a water base, and then that water dries out, and you still have this fire retardant / fertilizer present. I think the gotchas there are you really can't expect to have some sort of lawn sprinkler system because it'll wash it off. If you do a drip line at the base of the plant, that's another thing. And then there are certain situations where very windy conditions can sort of mechanically fracture that dried on retardant and could make it dissipate by that mechanism. So it's there. I think that there's a lot of evidence that it can work, but you have these two things you need to consider. And the other thing to remember is that it is a fertilizer. And so the plant can grow maybe more than it might normally. And so you might have unprotected parts of the vegetation that have grown since the application.
Great, thanks, Steve. Another question about a different product is, some people have asked about paints. Are there paints that you can apply to your house as a permanent solution to this problem?
So thanks for that question. It's a very good question. I think arguably a paint, and I think when you're talking about these kind of paints, you're talking about intumescent coatings. And these intumescent coatings are coatings that when they experience heat, either in the form of flame or higher radiant heat, they start to swell up and they generate an insulating layer. So they protect the siding, let's say, in that way by swelling up. So there have been some research on these products, and the problem with them is, and so just to back up a minute, they're used commonly in an interior location, like in your living room, and they work well there. I think the problem when these are used in exterior locations where they can be rained on, you have UV from sun and a lot of moisture cycling, they have been shown not to have a very long service life. And so they may not last as long as the manufacturer says. So if you're considering them, you need to make sure you can see results of fire test after the product has been weathered, so been subjected to moisture cycling and sunshine kind of cycling, to have some comfort level that it's going to work in the long run. These are pretty thick coatings, so you need to worry about reapplication and whether the thing will adhere the second time around, because even the good ones, aren't going to last forever. They'll probably last less than a paint cycle, normal paint cycle in a home. And finally, I think when these do work, they're going to work because the intumescent coating is used as a primer coat, and you're going to have a regular old paint on top of that. So you might want to just think about what the manufacturer suggests in terms of an application cycle. But most importantly, you want to make sure you can see results of fire testing after the product has been weathered.
Great, thanks, Steve. Well, again, as usual, another great presentation. Very much appreciate it. Steve will be back with the roundtable in a couple of minutes. The way we try to wrap up our webinars is to give you a few takeaways. And so, Jen, if you could bring that up on the screen, please. Great. So I think number one, we go back to Chief Tyler's presentation. And I think it's fair to say in fire adapted communities, and this is important, public expectations are realistic and not based on a reliance of the government to provide all the answers. Individuals accept personal responsibility for their property. Fire prevention starts at your own home. It doesn't mean the government doesn't have a role to play in things. That's why we're all working with you tonight. We'll talk more about that later. But there is a level of personal responsibility in fire adaptive, and the kind of programs we're giving you tonight are all designed to help you build up that local reliance and sustainability. Second thing is related to that is take advantage, if you haven't, of going to the Fire Safe Marin website. There's just a ton of material on there that's really helpful. And one of them that's very useful is the Evacuation Checklist. And that really was the guideline that Todd was referencing when he talked about those last minute changes you can make. So it not only prepares you for the evacuation itself, but it clues you into some of those steps that you could be taking when you do have time before you actually need to leave. Obviously, sprinkler systems and gels, there's pros and cons. So you really need to carefully do your research on the products before you purchase. And please do not look at them as some kind of substitute for taking the regular common sense steps towards creating defensible space and hardening your home. Those actions are going to pay off for you in the long run in a big way. So Fire Safe Marin, related to that, recommends that hardening your home, insulation of fire smart landscaping, creation of defensible space is really the better way to prep your home than using gels, paints, or installing exterior sprinklers. We're not opposed to doing that, but you really don't want to miss out on doing those kinds of activities. All right. Well, what I'd like to do now is to bring back our group, Chief Tyler and Todd and Steve, and we'll have a little discussion about a few things. You can keep providing questions through the Q&A that we can bring up as we need to. We're doing that. But one of the questions which had come up during the presentation tonight was, why isn't the focus on forest thinning rather than all this talk about residents? Isn't that really where the problem is?
I can answer that. Forest thinning and really the buildup of a lot of dead and down material in California, the Western U.S., really the whole world's forests, has to do with fire suppression. Chief Tyler mentioned this. We've been putting out fires that were the natural source of cleaning up all of that dead material. California's forests all depend on wildfire to regenerate soils, to regenerate plant growth, and eliminate that buildup of material. That said, that is something that we need to think about and we need to look at, but it won't protect your home, at least not in the way you think it might. And it is not the best approach to reduce the loss of homes and lives during wildfires. What we need to focus on is the area closest to homes. Some really good science out of the 1990s looked at the vegetation that affects homes during wildfires. Research by Jack Cohen, who presented here just a couple months ago, and he found that vegetation more than 200 feet from a structure had almost no bearing on whether that structure would survive or burn during a wildfire. It's only the vegetation within 200 feet that really makes an impact on your structure. That's in your defensible space zone, and it really isn't the type of forest thinning that I think this question is getting at. In Marin, when we look at forest thinning on, say, in the Mount Tamalpais watershed, MMWD lands that are far away from homes, we are concerned about wildfire there, but it's really to protect our water system and other infrastructure more than the homes. We have to understand that wildfire is going to burn out there, and it's only how that fire behaves when it gets close to homes that we need to be concerned about.
Chief, do you want to add to that?
I would just add, that we've learned that, fire brands and embers can travel for a very long distance, over a mile. So even if you were to do, fuel breaks and work out into the open space areas, those brands and embers can be, carried in a convection column up into the air. The wind will blow them, and then the brands and embers will land, immediately adjacent to your home. They'll land in your plants. They'll gather, at these vulnerable places on your home. And so your job, what you can do, is to try and modify that landscape so that if those plants catch on fire, the fire is not carried to the structure. And if those brands and embers begin to collect in places on your home, you reduce the vulnerability of it igniting. Those are concrete steps that you can do, and leave the fires out in the forest to the firefighters.
Yeah, I just want to add to that if you heard our presentation last month, our public land managers actually do a lot of work. And my own experience is a pretty fantastic job of trying to maintain those lands as safely as possible, and also focusing on those areas which are relatively close to homes through goat grazing, all kinds of fuel management programs and whatnot. So we're blessed in Marin having a lot of areas that are where we're really paying attention to that and spending significant resources on it. And now that we have the new Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, you can expect even more projects related to creating those kinds of fuel breaks where they're still needed. Another question that came up, somebody asked, well, since if we have a wildfire, our resources are going to be stretched, why can't fire departments just leave fire hose out by fire hydrants and let citizens put out the fires for us?
I'll tell you that the fire hydrants aren't designed for that. They provide large volumes of water at low pressures. And a fire hydrant really requires the pump that's inside a fire engine to make it work the way you might expect it. Your garden hose, believe it or not, is probably more effective than a hose directly attached to a fire hydrant. So that's just really not what they're designed for. It's not an option. Not to mention the fact that it takes, several big, strong firefighters to pick up those hoses. They're really heavy. And again, the hydrants just don't work that way.
What has been some of the experience of people who have stayed back? You oftentimes see the picture of the person up on the rooftop of their home as the fire is approaching with their garden hose, trying to put out the fire. How's that? How effective has that been?
It's not effective at all. And frankly, if there's fire on the ground, embers landing on the ground that are big enough to require a hose to put them out, you need to have already evacuated. It's not safe to be there.
Chief, one of the things that Steve brought up is that if sprinklers are connected to the domestic water supply, particularly if a lot of them are going off at the same time, that potentially could drain resources that firefighters could use. Are there any kind of regulations or codes related to that?
That's a good question. I know that most of the systems that I've heard, homeowners want to try and install have to do with, pumps that are tied to their, if they have a swimming pool, or maybe they've got a portable tank or something like that. We don't want them using the water that is attached to the hydrants. There's a really limited amount actually in some of these areas. And so if they use that water or they leave these sprinklers on, it can end up draining down those tanks and using the water that we're going to need, robbing the water from us to be able to apply it strategically where it's needed.
Great, thanks. Steve, there was a home hardening question that wasn't specific to tonight's topic, but I thought it was something you might be able to weigh in on. And that is, there's a lot of plexiglass skylights. What's their vulnerability to embers?
Well, plexiglass skylights are typically the dome type, so rounded, not flat. From an ember perspective, they are vulnerable if you have debris accumulating next to them, and that debris ignites, and then the flames from that debris impinge on the skylight itself. That's the vulnerability. The ember, if you don't have debris around the skylight, embers are going to not accumulate because of the shape of them. It's really about the likelihood of flames getting to that skylight for the plexiglass type. And then they burn well.
Great, thank you. Chief, one of the, I think, most important projects funded by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority is the Defensible Space Inspection Program, and you talked a little bit about that. Could you go into a little bit more detail about how that works and what the public can expect when one of the wildfire mitigation specialists visits their home?
Yeah, when one of the specialists visits your home, they've already had hours and hours and hours of training that specifically give them the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to take a look at the home and figure out where those vulnerabilities are in terms of the type of construction, combustible construction versus fire resistive features, and then maintenance. And they're gonna share that information with you so that you can begin to have a list or a prescription to figure out, where am I gonna start? You know, how can I, usually the affordability of making some of these changes, but you're eventually, if you live at your home long enough, eventually the siding will be changed, the doors, the windows, the decks, the roofs, etc. And what we're asking you to do is to consider ignition resistant construction materials when you make those changes so that you can reduce those hazards over time. And then they've been trained to identify what types of plants are fire prone and how they are arranged in clumps or spaced under trees, etc. And they're going to give you their best advice they have on how to change the spacing or change the plant type so that it reduces the opportunity for that fire to be carried to the structure. And this is done in a very learning, helpful way. These people are not there in a punitive way to try and penalize you. These are not gotchas. These are not followed up with citations, but it's simply meant to help you understand how you can reduce your risks.
Great. Todd, when we talk about this concept of fire adapted communities, how does programs like FireWise fit in with that concept? Oop, you're on mute though.
Thanks. Well, FireWise really ought to be seen as just one of the tenets, one of the parts of fire adapted communities. FireWise is, a program that was intended to bring education and encourage homeowners to take action on their own property, to help them understand that it's what they do around their own home that makes the biggest difference. And when we work as a community and everybody takes this step, you build resilience across that neighborhood. So the fire adapted community concept requires some level of organization and engagement by individual homeowners, but it also takes into account a whole number of other factors like Chief Tyler covered, beyond just what the individual homeowner can do. So that's for a resident, for a homeowner who's looking to protect their individual property and ensure that their neighborhood survives a fire. The FireWise USA program is going to be their interface with the fire adapted community.
Great. Steve, we're getting near the end here, but one of the things I always appreciate about all your presentations is they're all based on research, whether it be done in a laboratory or field work or whatnot. And now that we've been having, really in the last 4 or 5 years, this explosion of wildfires in Northern California, do you have a sense of where research post-fire is going, how much work is being done for that, and how that will inform us more and more about what strategies work and which ones don't?
So I think the next big push in research is understanding transfer of fire from home to home where buildings are located fairly close to each other. So I think that's the next thing. And there's a project just getting underway that will evaluate and measure radiant heat from various sizes of burning structures towards a target home. So from a neighboring home down to a tool shed kind of a structure. This will help guide how we want to define and provide guidance regarding home hardening efforts in neighborhoods. So I think we'll see this, and I think that's the next big thing.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm gonna give a little bit of a preview related to something I just talked about with Steve that's coming up in the future. And that is, recently we had the glass fire in Sonoma, and Mark Brown, who's now the executive, I forget the title exactly, but I'll say executive director for one of the correct title of the new Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. His home happened to be in the area where that glass fire took place. And he took that opportunity to bring a lot of our wildfire mitigation specialists who do the evaluations here in Marin and brought them up there to do a walkthrough of his neighborhood. And unlike a neighborhood like Paradise, where everything is kind of wiped out and sometimes it's a little bit hard to see what was successful, why a home survived and one didn't. In his neighborhood, a smaller number of homes were burned and quite a few survived. And he goes through and explains why homes survived and why they didn't. So we filmed all that and we've turned it into an educational video. In the spring, I believe in May, we don't have an exact date, we are in Marin County going to be doing 5 what we're calling workshops, one for each of the 5 jurisdictions of the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority. And we're going to be showing that a video, and we're going to be using that as a way to really help explain to homeowners post-fire, here's where a lot of these concepts that we talk about here all the time, and here's where they produced a failure, where a home burned, and here's why, because of steps that were taken, they made a successful home. So it's something to look forward to. I hope everybody starts putting it on their calendar, and we're hoping for a high attendance of that. We'll have a lot of other presentations to go along with, and I think it'll be something very exciting to come down the road. So as a conclusion, I really want to thank our presenters for having taken the time to do this. Chief Tyler, Steve Quarles, Todd Lando, and also once again, the audience. You had a lot of great questions, and as was pointed out, there were a lot of other things going on tonight. And this is not exactly what some people think of as the height of fire season with a giant storm and pouring rain, but we had wonderful attendance, and I thank all of you for doing that. And once again, thank you for all the presenters, and we'll see you next month.